Hello everyone and welcome to the next video. In this video we are going to be looking at the anatomy of the neuron. So let's get started. We're going to draw our neuron here, and we're going to draw a Schwann cell, and as we all know, Schwann cells are in the peripheral nervous system. So let's start from the top and move our way down. At the very top of the cell are these projections, and these projections are dendrites. And dendrites receive incoming information. Then we have the cell body, and the cell body is also sometimes called soma or soma, okay? There's also a nucleus in the middle of the cell. So we'll color in the nucleus here. And there are also organelles inside of the cell body. One of the organelles inside the cell body is something called Nissl substance, okay? And Nissl substance equates to the endoplasmic reticulum. And if you remember when we were talking about eukaryotic cells, the endoplasmic reticulum, and there's a smooth and a rough endoplasmic reticulum, and the ribosomes on that are responsible for synthesizing proteins, okay? Now, there's an important area in the cell body called the axon hillock, and I'm going to change colors for just a moment here to mark it with an X, okay? So this is our location of the axon hillock. And as you might remember, the axon hillock is the place where the action potential starts or fires, and it's an all or nothing response, which means that once it starts, it goes, okay? It's either all or nothing. It either starts and goes, or it stops and does not do anything. And we'll talk about that in a separate lecture. Okay, moving down the parts of our neuron. So now we're coming down, and this is the axon, okay? So this is our axon. Now, if you remember, our Schwann cells are wrapped in a lipid coat or a lipid-like substance called myelin. So now we're going to put in our myelin, okay? So there's our myelin. And again, myelin is a lipid-like substance. Now, as we move down towards the bottom of the axon, the neuron is actually going to come to an end. So at the very end, it's going to be the axon terminal. And again, these axon terminals can branch similar to the dendrites. Sorry, I had to squeeze that in there. And then at the very end of the axon terminal, you can see here these tiny little bulbs. There's different vocabulary words for these. Some people call them synaptic boutons. Other people call them terminal bulbs or synaptic bulbs, whatever your choice. So we'll call them synaptic boutons, but we'll abbreviate it and call them synaptic buttons, okay? And the little synaptic buttons or boutons at the end, that's where the neurotransmitters are released from. Now, another thing that we need to be aware of, and I'm going to code this in green, we were looking at the axon and the myelin that wraps it. Now, in between these segments of myelin are these bare patches of axon that I'm just going to tag on either side with green, okay? And these bare patches of axonal membrane are called nodes of Renvier. Nodes of Renvier. Okay, now in the nodes of Renvier, there are sodium and potassium channels. And those sodium and potassium channels allow for the flow of sodium and potassium. And as we've learned, sodium and potassium help to propagate the action potential down the length of the axon. So essentially what happens is the axon hillock starts the action potential, sodium and potassium start flowing, and they're essentially regenerated at the nodes of Renvier when more sodium flows in and potassium flows out. So it, as we say, jumps from node to node, okay? And this is known as saltatory conduction. I'm sorry, that's a little bit difficult to read, okay? So for now, this is all we're going to talk about, and we'll go into more detail in future lectures. So I want to type this up really quick so that it's clear for you. So we've got our dendrites receive incoming signals. We've got the cell body or soma. Within the cell body is the nucleus. And then we also saw that we have nissl substance, which is equivalent to the the endoplasmic reticulum. Then we have our axon hillock. We have our axon. We have our myelin. We have our axon terminal. We have our synaptic buttons. And we have our nodes of Renvier. Okay, so I'm going to erase this just for a second so that you can clearly see that, so that my sloppy little drawing here is not blocking the typing. Okay, so those are the parts of the neuron that you need to be familiar with. Okay, all right, have fun learning neuroanatomy.